want to share with you from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. This contains Tracy's favorite passage. In verse 1 it says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on men. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy and do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so men will revere him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. Every day at midnight, someone who loves you very much deposits 86,400 seconds into your bank of time. That is, of course, the equivalent of 24 hours. Each of us is granted that same amount. It's the most precious commodity that we have because once it's spent, it can never be recaptured. It's irretrievable. So how will you spend today's allotment of 86,400 seconds? And how does God fit into the mix? If you're postmodern in your thinking, or if you regard God as some spiritual lifestyle enhancement, you're going to be disturbed what I'm about to tell you. First of all, you're not in control. No matter how much you manage your life, no matter how hard you try to bend reality to fit your expectations and preferences, regardless of the effort you expend on living life on your terms, one day your heart and lungs are going to stop, and there's nothing you can do to change that. If you have the courage to look honestly, you realize that there's very little over which you and I have genuine control. The second thing is that you were made to live beyond yourself. A man I deeply admire and respect often said, when you're all wrapped up in yourself, you make a really small package. The most miserable people that I know are also the most self-centered. The emptiest, most hollow people are those who are most full of themselves. Solomon profoundly writes in verse 11, he has put eternity in man's heart. Who we are and what we do not only impacts those around us right now, but they also impact those who will follow us someday. And because he has set eternity in our hearts, we will never ultimately be complete or feel fulfilled until the plan that God has designed for us is in place and working effectively. There are three things I wish to share with you concerning God's place in your life at this time. The first of these is sovereignty. Look again at verses 2 through 8. The word time is used 28 times in 14 pairs of opposites. Now, I won't go into detail on all of these, but I do want to touch on briefly on a couple. To kill does not mean to commit murder. It speaks of capital punishment or the destruction of war. Gathering and scattering stones refers to demolition and construction. Gain and lose takes us into the realm of economics. Tear and sow point to the time where we begin to grieve and when that time of grief comes to an end. The 14 pairs, double sevens, indicate completeness. These verses also summarize the major activities of our lives, and while we participate and experience it, the whole range of human existence is beyond our control. Whether we acknowledge Him or not, we live according to God's determination and not our own. To quote Hubbard, he said, "It is God's planned time that indicates the important activities and events of our lives." And I agree with that. And the wise person submits to God's will and accepts His plans for their lives. Corrie ten Boom, who wrote The Hiding Place, Dutch believer that was hiding from the Nazis and during the takeover of World War II of the Netherlands, wrote this in one of her books, that during one of the Nazi bombing raids, she could not sleep. She was terrified, and she heard her sister Betsy downstairs, and so she got up and she thought, I'll just go downstairs, spend some time with Betsy. When I feel better, I'll come back to bed. Well, when she came back to bed in the darkness and she fluffed her pillow, she cut her hand on a 10-inch piece of shrapnel. She ran downstairs crying, "What if I hadn't been scared? What if I hadn't been able to sleep? What if you hadn't been down here? What if I hadn't talked to you?" And her sister Betsy said, "When you are God's child, there are no ifs in His world." Look again at verse 11. When you look at it, life doesn't always look beautiful. Sometimes it doesn't seem appropriate. But Romans 8:28 and 29 assure us that when placed in God's hands, whatever that situation, He works in it. He redeems it so that we bear His image of His Son. Put your ifs in His hands and allow Him to work out His plan for your life. The second thing that I would share with you is seasonal. Again, looking at verses 2 through 8, I want you to note that God moves in a distinct manner during specific seasons of our lives. But here's the rub. Because God has put eternity in our hearts, we possess a vexing curiosity. We want to know why. We sense that there is a destiny that needs shaping. And so we need to know, where is this going? And what does this mean that's happening in my life? And because of the finiteness and the limitations of our humanity, we can't fully grasp it. Not in the beginning or the middle or even the end. And then to add to this, God deals from the perspective of eternity. Now, for the Old Testament people, eternity did not mean the absence of time or timelessness. It meant to them being able to go back as far as in the past as possible and moving forward into the future as far as possible. It was, if you will, time in its fullness. So where does that leave us? Well, a little boy was taken to the symphony. And I think I know how he felt. I remember the first time my parents took me to the Ohio Theater. This little fellow was in awe of the concert hall and the musicians and everything that happened. And at one point, a man crashed the cymbals together. Now, he only did it a few times during the concert, but he became the boy's favorite. And after the concert, his parents took him back and introduced him to the cymbal player. And one of the many questions this boy asked him was, "Do you have to know a lot of music?" And he said, "No, you don't have to know a lot. You only have to know when." My friend Stan Toller wrote a book entitled, God's Never Late, He's Seldom Early, but He's Always Right on Time. And to determine God's timing in our lives, to help us to understand the whens, I want to share with you 3 guiding thoughts that I hope will help you. The first is observation. What's God doing in the world right now? What's taking place in a major way? But then reflection. Ask yourself, what is God doing in my life, in my immediate situation? And then the third thought is consecration. Am I quick to obey what I do know and understand? You know, you and I sometimes, we get ourselves hung up on the uncertainties, on the unknowing, on the mysteries. We allow the unknown to paralyze us, where the crucial thing is that you and I act on what we do know and what we do understand, and just allow Him to work out the details as they unfold. In Numbers chapters 13 and 14 contains the story of the 12 spies that Moses sent out to spy out the land of Canaan. They had only been out of Egypt for a few weeks. They could have gone immediately in. And the 12 spies returned, and Joshua and Caleb said, it's a beautiful land. It's a wonderful land. Yes, there are fortress cities and there are armies, but God has given it to us and we need to go get it now. And the other 10 spies said, no, there are giants there. There are fortified cities. We can't possibly do it. And God told them to go. And the people said no. And God said, okay, you're going to wander for 40 years in this wilderness until the disobedient older generations die out. Well, they didn't like that. And so they gathered some weapons and they went up and they tried to do battle and take the land, and they suffered a humiliating defeat. And all of it took place within a few days. When we as individuals or as congregations say no to God, He'll let us have our way, but He will send what the Old Testament calls leanness of soul. Leanness of soul is marked by a timid faith, a tepid love, and a short-circuited power. The measure of joy and victory and blessing that we experience tomorrow is directly related to our level of obedience today. Now, if you have spiritually taken a detour, or if you've perhaps gotten derailed entirely, there's good news. God knows where you are. And if you will turn to Him, He will turn to you, and you can have His victory, His blessing, and His power. Sovereignty, seasonal. The third word is security. His plan for your life and for mine is secure. Look at verse 14. Whatever God does endures forever. Jeremiah 29:11, most of you, if not all of you, know this. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans for good and not for evil. Plans to give you a future and a hope. This is not pie-in-the-sky utopianism. The reality is we live in a world that's cursed by sin, that's a world filled with bad actors that can swamp us in the wake of their selfish, irresponsible behavior. So there will be times when life slides sideways. There will be times where it feels like it's spinning out of control. And yet we can live in peace and security because His plan and our lives are in His hands. Flo must have been reading my notes this week because I'm going to quote the chorus of the hymn that we sang today. Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow. And I know who holds my hand. During the darkest night of my life, one of the greatest lessons that I learned is that I don't have to be strong and hold it together. I can rest in His strength and let Him hold me. And He has. And He does. And He will for you. And who is it that holds us? It is God's Son, of whom it is written, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. The hands that hold us are loving hands. They are hands that endured nails for our sake. He can be trusted with the pages of our calendar. What time is it? It's time to put our hope and our trust and our confidence in the God who created us, who loves us, and who guides us into His future.